Bering connection, they were to spend the day with Darwin on his ship, the Beagle. He was a true gentleman with a vastly inquiring mind. He could have wonderful talks. She would, of course, take lots of Gravol and try to get him to take some too, since he was seasick the entire voyage, from the moment he was in the harbor at Southampton on a visit to meet his captain, Fitzroy. Please welcome our next storyteller, Mary Lee Stevenson.
I've actually spent a number of trips in the Galapagos Islands, and there was one time when it was so rough that you couldn't see the outside for the waves being so high. So we sang for about 5 hours. There's a 7-year-old with us. We thought, well, we'll just keep singing, keep her spirits up. And, in reality, it was keep our spirits up. We were just terrified. But in any case, I liked your story so much that I've actually been distracted. I like, where'd you go, Mike? But anyway, when I was 16, I got called a National Science Foundation Fellowship to spend a summer at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. I was in school in San Diego, and it was at La Jolla, and very, very, one of the 2 main institutes of oceanography in the States, if not in the world. And for me, science was really quite distant. I don't even know how I happened to be given this. I think they thought, we got to fill it up. The university expects somebody to show up. And I had good grades and everything. So they thought, well, who knows English? She's good at English. Maybe she should broaden her spectrum or something or other. And so I had this sense that science was very far distant, very far removed, very esoteric and impersonal. That, they'd be sitting there with putting, equations on a board or be in some kind of ivory tower. This was, I got to tell you, 1960. Okay, I would have qualified among the Barbs, but my name's Mary Lee. But other than that, so it was just there wasn't a Stephen Hawking in those days. There wasn't a Carl Sagan. They were just like, they're over there way. And I wasn't too good at math. So it wasn't something that really I could relate to. But I thought, well, what the hell, this summer, it wasn't an internship, it wasn't paid. You just were there to be in a science context. And so I show up there, and it's in a hut. It's in a World War II hut. They have a few big buildings, but it's back there. It's like when later I went and did my PhD at UBC in the early 70s, we were in the hut, the sociology, we were in the hut. The Army has done a great deal for science, I think. But so I get there, and the people just seem like regular old folks, and it was there at La Jolla, right by the water, so everybody wore their little Bermuda shorts. And at lunch, people go and body surf. Well, I body surfed because I couldn't deal with the surfboards. I mean, they were like bigger than me, right? But I could body surf. There's a lot you can do with a good pair of flippers. And everybody was always afraid in those days of killer whales. That was the monsters of the deep. And if you were on your board and you saw this big shadow, you'd think, oh God, it's over, But so we'd do that, and what I rapidly realized, or at least saw, as I'm observing, and participating, but how practical things were. For instance, in fact, in the unit next to us, they were studying the impacts of pressure, as in the ocean, as it gets deeper and deeper, the pressure is enormous. And so then they had created, in order to test this, they had created a sphere, because they studied sea turtles, who have to deal with a lot of up and down, right? And so it was beautiful. It looked like some kind of moon. And the tech department, like Bruce had to create it. And so there's the hemispheres, and they had whatever, the washers. And then they would put the sea turtle in there, and they would just pump up the pressure. I don't know if, as I say, are they doing this for submarines or the space program? I don't know. But the thing is, they told me, I didn't see this, that one time they had put the pressure so much that when they opened it, it's just blood and guts of this poor sea turtle. Yeah, But still very, very practical. And what I was on was the kelp project. And even at that time in 1960, they were looking at why was kelp disappearing? Why was there less? And you know kelp, you see it on the beach, the big tall things and the bulbs and the stipes and everything. And so they couldn't figure out why that was happening, but you have to be able to study it in the field, that is to say, in the ocean. But kelp, now we get into the science lecture for just a moment. Kelp does not have roots, right? It doesn't get its nutrition in roots. It just has the holdfast, this gnarly thing, you see that on the beach, and then it gets its nutrition however the hell it does, okay. So you have to have a way of, if not growing it, of studying it, so it has to be in one place. So the study was down in Ensenada off the coast of Mexico, right? And every 2 or 3 months they'd go. And so they would construct on their own, they'd have to have transects, which is, a set square. And so they would then weave. It's sort of like when your kids, when you do the pot holders, over, under, over, under, over, under. They would weave these things and then anchor it somehow to the floor. And so it would look like you can do on your computer now, table, 1 over 3 across. And so it would be a certain size with open squares. And that way you could say, okay, the kelp on A17 is in this condition, the one on D whatever. And then they would have to go down, of course. They were all scuba trained. That there was a technician, 2 or 3 graduate students, the main professor, and then a girl who had been there the year before and had just finished her first year at Stanford. And they all became scuba divers, and it wasn't just for the fun of it. It was what you had to do in a very practical sense to do your work. And they would go down, and that water was freezing cold, these upwelling currents, just huge, terrible, terrible cold, even in wetsuits. And they'd come up, I remember one of them, his ears bleeding and stuff, like, ooh, but very hands-on. And that was wonderful for, in a sense, humanizing or making more real the scientists. But there was another part that made them more real. Because when we get down to the place in Mexico, which was just some cactus-strewn field, I'd still think, what did we do? Did they have a pit toilet? They must have had. But when we get there, then I realized that the lovely administrative assistant woman and the technician were in a relationship because they had their own tent. And then the girl who had just come back from her first year at Stanford was in a relationship with the head of the whole project, 40 years her senior, married and with kids. But what struck me was, I was brought up as a Seventh-day Adventist, and so sexuality or deep relationships like that were not only sinful, weird, and secretive, okay, or not talked about, but it was normal. These were like normal, regular old folks doing something that I knew was like ethically perhaps challenged, but still, it was somehow such a relief for me, that you could, that caring about people or doing it, that it wasn't necessarily, well, it was sinful, but I didn't care about that. It was, like just human and, again, normal. So I learned that about people as I'm sort of observing. The other thing about it, we had to do a science project. It's not like what's growing in my refrigerator. It was supposed to be a science project. So I and another girl who was the daughter of one of the scientists, and this goes back to the sheer practicality of science. We decided that we would do a study of the feeding preferences of the sea hare, Tethys californica. The sea hare is it's a snail. It's in the snail mollusk family, okay? And if you took if you had one of your garden snails, but took off the back, and so you've got, they've got little horns and everything, and it get a little slimy because they have to be protected. But they're beautiful, and they had, there's the body, picture like a banana type thing with 2 little mantles there, and marvelous, marvelous things. So we had then, they got us, the scientists, these 4 big pickle jars. I mean, this was really practical. These big pickle jars, and there's an aerator. And each day, me and Barb, we would take 4 kinds of seaweed, the same 4, and we would take it, feed it to them, and then the next morning take out the seaweed and measure it and weigh it, but also had to measure and weigh the sea hares. Now, because they're snail-type things, they're very elastic, okay? Very elastic. And so, on the one hand, if they're disturbed in some ways, they shrink right up. And the guys here will know when you hit really cold water what happens. So sometimes they would be that way. But then as they relaxed, and we're having to take them out of this pickle jar, and take them over to what was really just kind of one of those tall kind of almost kitchen scales, right? We had to pick these things up, and they got used to us. So when you'd pick it up, it would be the opposite. They would just go, they would just elongate, and you're handling this slippery, and I don't think my repulsion has to do with me being gay. I think it just was like anybody would feel that way, and it would just go, and then you're trying to be scientific, and this thing is hitting the counter, and it would mess up the weighing, right? You don't want to mess up the weighing, and so you would have to try to get this thing back up there, and then they also squirt out black ink if they're really disturbed, and you have to do all that. So we went through the whole summer, we did our little scientific thing, we wrote our scientific report, and when I sort of look back and look at things now, because those were formative years, it's true I didn't go on in science or biology, but what I was really doing the whole time was always observing. What's going on? What are these people? What are their relationships and all that? So it's not a surprise that when I did go into graduate school, it was sociology, because sociology is people and the stories of them. And really, it's the same thing as our storytelling. It's the same way as our storytelling tonight. So thank you. I hope you liked it, and good for coming to Science World.
Thank you so much.